Orleans doesn't have a ton of money to spend, but they still have some possible needs that they could address in free agency. Welcome into Saints Now by Chat Sports. I'm your host, Trace Girouard. As always, we're going to be diving into some free agent targets at a lot of different positions of need that I think that the Saints still have. But before we get into that, subscribe for Saints news and videos every single day, including live shows and watch parties during the regular season, the offseason, and all sorts of awesome stuff. But I'll make you a deal. Every time we get a subscriber on this video, I'm going to give my new dog, Dude, a little extra love. And he's such a good boy. So if you want to tell him he's a good boy, hit that sub button right now. So let's start off with the wide receiver room. I think that it's a solid unit so far. I think it's actually a pretty underrated group in my personal opinion. I think that there's guys like Bub Means, Jermaine Jackson, Kyle Sheets, Mason Tipton, some of those additions through the draft process and undrafted free agency. I think some of these guys can make the roster and also have a big impact as well. But if you wanted to go add a free agent wide receiver, here are 4 players that I kind of zeroed in on for the Saints specifically. One, I went Hunter Renfrow for very obvious reasons. We've discussed him a handful of times in great detail on the channel, but the reasons are obvious. Derek Carr, he's a slot option. There's familiarity there, so that's that around Hunter Renfrow. Mecole Thomas, I don't think that reunion is happening anytime soon, but he is still available in free agency, so we're going to throw him into the graphic. Mecole Hardman, we're going to talk about him here in just a second. He is a guy that could line up in the slot for the New Orleans Saints, but I don't think he's going to require a massive role. And then Lynn Bowden, who actually did play last year with New Orleans, very limited role, his usage was very specific and was very, targeted, so he wasn't really asked to do a ton outside of what was structured for him to do, so maybe that's an option, but let's dive into Mecole Hardman. And, this is a guy who last season spent some time with the Jets, spent some time with the Chiefs, and he's won a handful of Super Bowls with Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. But the production for Mecole Hardman is something that kind of concerns me. It's nothing really amazing, but he is an option at the slot position, and he is a guy who's lined up a lot on the inside for a wide receiver. And on top of that, he's pretty good when it comes to the playoffs, and when you need to call on his name, he tends to answer the call pretty regularly. So maybe this is an option for a guy who knows how to win and knows how to succeed late in the season and when your back's against the wall in the postseason. So maybe that's an option. But do you think that the Saints even need to add another wide receiver? Just give me a simple yes or a no in the comments section. If you want to go a little bit further and above and beyond, share your thoughts on who you would like the Saints to add at wide receiver. So here's how the offensive line is currently shaken out. This is what the starting group is looking like for at OTAs, at organized team activities. Again, they're all voluntary, but it's good to see all of these guys pretty much present. Trevor Penning, he's actually going to move over to the right side, whereas Taliese Fuanga has been getting work on the left side. Now, I think that this is something that's still being workshopped, so I haven't officially made the change on the graphic, but we have seen a lot of work on the right side from Trevor Penning, and he seems comfortable, whereas Taliese Fuanga has actually looked pretty solid at the left tackle position. Now, in terms of some options for the outside tackle spot, Donovan Smith, who spent some time with the Kansas City Chiefs. David Bakhtiari is actually a name that's been pretty common in terms of some of these free agency videos and free agency content you can find around the black and gold. He's not going to come at a super high price tag, but I also don't necessarily think he is the same player he once was. DJ Humphries is also an option, and Jason Peters, the Arkansas legend who was a tight end, moved to offensive line. I think that's how it worked. I don't exactly remember, but he kind of has played everything. He actually is a really solid run blocker, not great against the pass, but he is a player that I think could be interesting for like a rotational option for Dennis Allen and Klint Kubiak this season. But in a perfect world for me, I think that you actually have what you currently got on the roster pan out. I think that the best thing for the New Orleans Saints, Trevor Penning, he's a great fit at the right side, whereas Taliese Fuanga, he's your franchise left tackle. He succeeds on the left side, and he is very, very good there. Now, Dennis Allen spoke about the offensive line recently at organized team activities, saying, I think that's kind of the direction we're looking at now, really working Taliese over at the left side and giving Trevor an opportunity to work on the right side. We're still waiting to see where Ryan Ramczyk is when we get probably to training camp, being potentially the first time we see him. That's kind of the thought process. Now, obviously, we'll see what happens with the offensive line. Will Nick Saldiveri be the starting guard? Will Talise Fuanga be the left tackle? When he came out of Oregon State, he played the right side for the Beavers. However, there was a lot of belief from NFL scouts that Fuanga would be able to move over to the left side and be a left tackle as well. And all the reports coming out of not training camp, I keep saying that. All the reports coming out from OTAs are suggesting that Penning, he's showing some really good stuff on the right side, but he's also struggling a bit at times. But this is a new position for him to learn, so I wouldn't quite hit the panic bells yet. And I do think that it's good that they're getting Penning, or that they're giving Penning work on the right side this early on, so it's not a new position when training camp comes and when the preseason begins. And I got a lot more to discuss and a lot more free agents to share my thoughts on, but before we dive into that, you got to download Prize Picks. It's the #1 DFS app in North America. And with Prize Picks, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a Prize Pick lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections, and you're locked in. Now, here are the projections I'm rolling with. I'm actually cooking up a UFC Prize Picks. Yep, they got MMA, they got esports, they got college sports, basketball, football season-long projections, MLB, all sorts of stuff. I'm rolling with Louisiana's finest, Dustin Poirier, out of Lafayette, to go with more than 0.5 significant strikes in his bout. I think that that's going to be a really fun one. And Sean Strickland, I'm going with less than 22 and a half minutes of fight time, and Randy Brown more than 0.5 takedowns. So if you want to make a projection in a Prize Picks slate around the UFC or around college sports or around the NFL or any sport, you can get started if you haven't already at prizepicks.com/CLNS and use our code CLNS for a first-time deposit match of up to $100. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. All that information is in the comment section and description of this video. Now, to kind of kick back to what we were discussing in the trenches, the offensive tackles, sure, last year they weren't really that great. I mean, you had Andrus Peat filling on the left side. You had Ryan Ramczyk on the right side. But the interior was really, really struggling as well. I mean, that was a big-time issue. And honestly, hot take, might have been more of a problem than the outside and at the tackle position. So here's some interior offensive guards that the Saints could go and target in free agency. You can go get Phil Haynes, Greg Van Roten, Mark Glowinski, who spent some time with the Giants last year, and Trai Turner, who actually the Saints signed right before training camp, and literally like 3 or 4 days later, he tears his quad, has a really bad injury, and goes on IR. So unfortunately, we never got to see Trai Turner's homecoming turn into production on the field in the Superdome, but maybe they would look at that again because he would be dirt cheap, and hey, he gets to play in his home state of Louisiana. But I do think that there's an internal option in Nick Saldiveri, and I think that it's a really solid option. Because if you go back in your time machine and remember to when the Saints selected the, at the time, right tackle out of Old Dominion, Nick Saldiveri was actually traded up for the first pick in day 3, which was round 4 of the 2023 draft, because the Saints viewed him as a future starter. And I think that they actually did the right thing by Saldiveri by letting him sit and develop and learn and get in better shape, because this is a young player who has really high upside and has a lot of nice attributes, but you needed to groom him into a solid offensive lineman at the NFL level, which is very different than when you're playing at Old Dominion. And on top of that, he's also been receiving a lot of first-team reps at OTAs at the left guard position specifically. So in the first session, we saw him splitting reps with Shane Lemieux in the with the ones. But in this last session, it's been just Saldiveri. So it looks like he's actually winning that battle, and he actually also put on a few extra pounds this offseason. He's looking good. I think that he could be a solid guard option for the New Orleans Saints, and I think that he could be honestly answering a lot of questions for us. But I want you to grade the offensive line for me. Give it a Madden grading. Just the offensive line, not the team as a whole, just the guys, the 5 starters in the trenches. Scale it for me 1 to 99. I'm going to roll with somewhere in the low 80s. I don't think it's a great unit. I think there's a lot of upside there, and I think that there's a lot of unknown around it, but I think that it is an overall good group, and I think it's a better group than we had last year. Now let's talk about tight end, because I actually posted this screenshot on social media recently, and it led to a lot of discussion as to whether or not the Saints tight end group is actually, pardon my French, worth a shit. I personally think they are. I think this is a good group. I think it's an underrated group. And I think especially for a guy like Dallin Holker or Michael Jacobson, who both have been shining at OTAs, they have a potential to make the roster here. And if you remember last year, the Saints carried 4 tight ends, with them being Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, Taysom Hill, and Jimmy Graham. And in terms of some free agents that are available at the tight end position, Jimmy Graham is available, and we're going to talk about it in a second. We'll get there. I know a lot of you guys are probably fired up about it, but we'll get there. Logan Thomas, also an option at tight end. Geoff Swaim and Marcedes Lewis. Lewis is a much older player, so I may be, not as inclined to kick the tires there, but Logan Thomas, I'm definitely at least interested in giving a call. But the name I'm most excited about is Jimmy Graham. And actually, I even put out a video yesterday on the channel discussing whether or not I think that the Saints should bring back Jimmy Graham for a last dance, and whether or not I think he would even be interested. So if you missed it, go check it out on the channel. The link is in the comments and description of this video. It's a really fun one. We go into a deep dive in Jimmy Graham's career and how much fun it was to have him, come back. And on top of that, how great he would be used with the new system under Klint Kubiak. So go check out this video if you haven't already after you're done with this one. But I do want to talk about Dallin Holker, because I think that New Orleans wants Holker to be around long term. And I'm going to look up the contract Dallin Holker signed. It was a guaranteed contract of $235,000, which is one of the highest that the NFL UDFAs saw across the entire league. And it certainly was the highest for the New Orleans Saints, and by a wide margin. So the Saints are investing in that player. They're not investing a lot, but they're giving him guaranteed money, and more guaranteed money than any undrafted free agent. And on top of that, he's been getting run with the first team, and he's been getting a lot of reps with the ones. So I think that that's a really good sign, and I do believe that Klint Kubiak and the New Orleans Saints believe that Dallin Holker can be a long-term weapon and a long-term option at the tight end position, rather than indulging and splurging on a guy like a Brock Bowers, who, if you don't remember, was taken the pick before the Saints. Now let's talk about the defensive side of the trenches, because this is a group that got not a lot of change to it, but there is definitely something to discuss here. And there's a little asterisk under Carl Granderson right next to Tano Passanio, because he's injured. But you have a group of a lot of interesting players. It's a lot more athletic group than we saw last year for New Orleans, and I think that it's a much faster and more explosive group, if that makes some sense. But the sack production was really, really bad for the defensive line. And I think that's why they brought in Chase Young, to get more sacks and to be more athletic. But here's a handful of options at free agency at the defensive end position that could be really solid. Now, Calais Campbell, last year he was with the Atlantic Falcons, and he was pretty damn good with 6.5 sacks. I think he's a player that could be really intriguing. Emmanuel Ogbah, an edge rusher who had 5 sacks with the Miami Dolphins last year. Unique Ngakoue, he's a player who hasn't had less than 8 sacks in the last 6 or 7 years plus, outside of obviously last year when he only had 4, but he missed some time due to injury. Now, Jerry Hughes, more of a rotational guy. Our Texans host here at Chat Sports, Jeremy Chuggs, I asked him about Jerry Hughes, and he said, he's good for a random sack every couple games, but he's more of a rotational guy. But Charles Harris, also an option as well in free agency. There's not a lot of really great names left in free agency for the edge rusher / defensive end position, but I do think that the New Orleans Saints need to be better in terms of their sack production. That is no questions asked. I don't care what the defensive line looks like. I don't care how different it is from last year. It needs to be better, because in 2023, New Orleans had 34 sacks, which was tied for 28th across the entire NFL. Now, worth noting, the Baltimore Ravens were number 1. They had 60. And if you wanted to even be in the top 10, you needed 48 sacks. That's a lot. And to be quite honest, I don't know if the Saints will get there this year. I hope they do. I think that with the new offense and with the new players on defense, it will be a better unit. But 44.5 sacks, that's what I want to set the line at. So place your bets. Over or under 44.5 sacks. If they can get to 45, that's a massive jump from what they did in 2023 at just 34 sacks. So that's 10 more. Can they get 10 more sacks this season? Just type over or under down below. I'll say this. I was kind of looking at free agent targets at the defensive tackle position, and I was a little curious as to what was going on, but I'm going to be honest. I think that the interior defensive line is actually set right now. I really like Bryan Bresee. Year 2 with him is going to be really exciting. He was one of the leading sack artists, or not sack artists, but he had some of the highest sack production for New Orleans. He was in the top 5 last year, and that was as a rookie. And there were certain games, like the Giants game at home, for example, where he took over, and you felt his presence, and you could not look away from the defense because he was making plays so often. And I think that that is really exciting. Colin Saunders, I think that he is a solid player who has a lot of energy and is a good fit culturally for the Saints. I like Nathan Shepard. He was pretty productive last year in his first season with the black and gold. And on top of that, Christian Boyd, a player that the Saints drafted later in the 2024 draft. I believe he was a 6th-round pick or late 5th round. He's impressive. He's unbelievably strong. And he's a player who was extremely productive last year at Northern Iowa. So I think that the defensive interior is actually okay for now, but that doesn't mean that you can't go and address it in the future, depending on how some of these guys develop. But I think that they have a really solid duo, a young duo between Bresee and Boyd that can take over for the long term. Now let's kick it to the defensive backs because this is an interesting group. I put this poll out on social media today. Do you think that this is a top 5 group in the NFL? I wanted to go top 3, but I feel like it's kind of tough to dive into the top 3, but I know for a fact this is a top 5 group. I mean, Paulson Adebo, one of the best corners in the league, one of the most underrated defensive players across the whole entire NFL. Jordan Howden in year 2 was pretty impressive last year, so hopefully year 2 can be can build off of that. Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger don't care. He is damn good, and he ages like a fine wine. Doesn't seem like he's ever slowing down. Marshawn Lattimore, we know what he is when he's healthy. And Alontae Taylor, still a lot to learn about him, but the arrows are moving in the right direction. And on top of that, you drafted Kool-Aid McKinstry, brought in Millard Bradford, as well as brought back Ugo Amadi and Will Harris. He added him in free agency. Now, here's some cornerbacks that you could possibly explore. All of these guys, they're all a little bit different. Xavien Howard, I think, could be a solid option, but I'm not really in love with it, and I think that he might ask for a little bit more than I'm willing to pay. Stephon Gilmore is the best player on this graphic, maybe outside of Steven Nelson, if you ask me, but I really like Stephon Gilmore. I think he's a really solid outside corner. And my main thought process there is if you do add Stephon Gilmore, you're set on the outside in case Marshawn Lattimore gets hurt, and you don't really have to worry about readjusting your entire defensive back group. And on top of that, you also don't have to worry about, is Kool-Aid McKinstry not ready? You can just go throw in a veteran who's really, really productive. Same with Steven Nelson. I really like him as an option as well. It's kind of a shock that neither of those two guys have been signed yet, but I think that maybe cornerback could be something that the Saints explore. But to be quite honest, I just don't think corner is a huge need. I think it's a good group. And I know a lot of people are like, well, Alontae Taylor's not that great. Or they have some thoughts about number 1, and I tend to disagree with a lot of them. I think Alontae Taylor's actually pretty damn good. Of course, there was a lot of bad last year, but there's also a lot of good last year. And, it was his first year playing the slot corner position. So, to be honest, I'm in the boat of and in the camp of give him a little bit of slack because it was his first season in that role. And last year, I think this is an interesting timeline. He was benched. You can't argue with it. He was benched due to lack of production and due to playing poorly at times. In Week 16, he was playing in the slot against the Rams, found his ass on the metal on the bench. And in Week 17, he made a really nice interception at the slot position where he ran with the Buccaneers receiver step for step and followed him, adjusted his body, cut off the wide receiver, and put himself in front of the ball to come up with a very important, very big-time interception at a very timely point in the game. Week 18, he struggled against the Falcons. He let up a couple big plays, and so he got benched. But then got sent right back onto the field playing on the outside, and he came up with a massive interception that was really, really good. And when I do think that Taylor is, maybe better suited for the outside, but I do think that the skill set and the mentality is there to be successful at the slot. So just give him some time, let him have a full offseason learning the nickel spot, and we'll see where we're at and maybe reevaluate here in a handful of months. And the last position I want to discuss is safeties, because I think this is the biggest position in need for New Orleans. Justin Simmons, it feels like we've beat a dead horse there trying to get the Saints to sign him, but I will not stop until Justin Simmons is wearing that fleur-de-lis on the side of his helmet. Eddie Jackson, maybe a good option as a rotational piece, but I'm not really going to rely on him being a starter. He's just got to stay healthy. That's a big one for him. Micah Hyde, I actually kind of like as an option. He can play down in the slot / in the box, so I think that he could be an intriguing possibility. Jamal Adams, I think it's a better name than it is player. I will say this, he's a really good pass rusher, and he had a really good pass rush grade according to PFF. And Quandre Diggs, another guy that the Saints could possibly target at safety. Maybe he could fill in at the in the middle of the field / down in the box. But my whole point with going and getting a safety, you don't need somebody who's going to play free safety. You don't need somebody who's going to drop back and try and protect the top of the field. Tyrann Mathieu's that guy. You don't need to worry about that. I want somebody who can play in the middle, who can be that strong safety role, play that Jordan, maybe play above Jordan Howden, let him develop and let him learn a little bit more. And it's not a knock on Howden. It's more so of I just want an option, and I want the ability to have somebody be present. So that way at any given time, you can have the best defensive backs on the field for the Saints in any moment. And that's more so what my argument here is. It's not a knock against Jordan Howden. It's more of I just want the Saints to have the best options as possible at any given moment for the defensive back. So shout them out for me, Saints fans. We went through a lot of targets that we could possibly see be the newest member of the Black and Gold, but I want you to name a free agent for me down below. Don't forget to subscribe, and y'all stay golden. We'll see you next time.